So thank you very much, Susana, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for being here with us today. Let me make maybe a quick introduction on the panel that we will have now to talk, as Susana was saying, about climate tech. And maybe the best way to kickstart and to frame it is to look at climate tech as basically a technological revolution that is coming that will disrupt many different industries over the next couple of decades, and that will have a very noble purpose underlying, which is the decarbonization of the economy and the human activity that is going to have a great impact in the planet. But as I was saying, it's good to look at decarbonization as a very, very deep technological transformation that, if you think about it, is going to touch every other industry that you can think about, and that is going to be also very global in its reach. Decarbonization will touch every other region, will touch every other sector, and also, because of that, is going to be also a very relevant investment cycle when you look at it with a global perspective. It's expected to be, indeed, the most relevant investment cycle in human history, 275 trillion to be deployed over the next couple of decades in order to decarbonize these hard-to-abate industries. And in that context, it's going to be a great challenge to finance those new technologies that are going to be low carbon and that will allow economy to achieve its net zero goals. So in that context of technological transformation that requires a lot of financing over the next years, we do have a panel here that I'm really, really glad to introduce. Within BBVA, sustainability and particularly decarbonization is one of our key strategic priorities. Because of that, over the next few months, we've been putting a lot of focus on the one hand side on investing and partnering with the most relevant venture capital and decarbonization funds globally. And within that context, we recently announced an investment in Just Climate, and some months before, we announced an investment in FIFWO. And Evelina Ordago here is a managing director at Just Climate, and Peter is a partner in FIFWO, which is another one of the funds that we've invested in. And then, beyond investing in decarbonization funds, we're also putting a lot of focus in BBVA in actually being a relevant player for the ecosystem and also being pioneer in financing those projects that might become more bankable. And to talk about that, we have Borja Saez from our project finance team, who also leads our clean tech initiative investment team that we are in the process of assembling. So with that said, as I was saying, we do have ahead of us a very, very deep technological transformation that is going to require a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship in order to make it happen, and that will require, as any technological process, a lot of financing coming from many different stakeholders, being banks, funds of different stages among them. So with this said, I think I'll kickstart the panel, and as I was mentioning, I'll give the word to Peter, who is with FIFWO, one of the funds that we've invested in. And actually, Peter, I will ask you on the first-hand side, thanks very much for coming. And if you can please tell us a little bit about FIFWO and your investment thesis. And then, can you give us also your view on how challenging it's going to be, in this case, for climate tech and decarbonization of the real estate sector, where you focus on the leap to move projects from pilot to commercialization stage because of the nature of the investments?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. So just a brief introduction on Fifth Wall. Fifth Wall is the largest asset manager focused on the built environment. We have about $3 billion of assets under management. The original genesis of the firm was focused on the collision of real estate and technology. It came from the fact that we found out that there were more funds spent on cannabis funds, on alternative proteins, and the largest asset class, real estate, really was not focused on technology investments. So one pillar is bringing software to the technology side, so we have several funds in that. The newer focus, though, is even a bigger problem, which is decarbonization of the built environment. We are based, the headquarters is in New York, but we have also offices in San Francisco, where I'm based, Los Angeles, London, and we just opened offices in Singapore and Abu Dhabi. We are trying to solve effectively two problems that we see in decarbonization of real estate. One is there's not enough capital flowing into this. To be specific, real estate and just buildings are responsible for 40% of carbon emissions between operations and construction, yet less than 5% of venture investing in climate has gone into real estate. Transportation has received over 50%. We obviously seen the successes of Tesla. We have now the next big block to move, which is decarbonization of the built environment. So one is lack of capital. The second problem that we see is, how is the capital is divided, right? We think that venture is starting to finally receive money, so the 40% IRR investments are starting to happen. Where we also see that there is plenty of capital ready on the back end on the infrastructure financing with that 10% IRR. There is a huge gap in the middle that we see with growth financing and with first-of-a-kind financing that is not 10 or 40%, it's the 15, 20, maybe 30% IRR financing. So those are the two gaps that we are aiming to fulfill. Focus on decarbonization of real estate, because without that, we will not achieve decarbonization, and focus on providing capital not just for venture, but also for scale-up.
Thank you very much, Peter. So that, let me pass it to Evelina, because in fact I think that Just Climate investment thesis is very, very focused on precisely bridging that gap that you were mentioning. So Evelina, could you please, on the first part of the question, introduce a little bit Just Climate and the investment thesis, and then maybe talk a little bit about how you're planning and focusing on precisely bridging that gap that Peter was referring to?
Absolutely. So Just Climate is what we call a climate-led investment manager. What that means is that we focus on backing the highest climate impact solutions. That means largest impact in terms of removal or avoidance, while seeking to generate an attractive return. And the reason I say climate-led is our whole process begins with research around where the emission's coming from. And the reason that's necessary for a commercial manager actually goes back to the point that Peter just made. The reality is when it comes to the climate crisis, there's two issues. One is there's not enough capital flowing in overall. As Antonio pointed out, there's a huge opportunity here. But there's a second issue, which is that the capital that does go towards financing climate solutions tends to focus on either things that are already highly de-risked or very tech-enabled, asset-light solutions which are necessary and will help facilitate the shift to net zero, but won't shift our real economy, the parts of the economy that drive the bulk of emissions, like the built environment, like steel production, like cement production, the things we see and feel and touch, which we rely on day to day. And so the reason we say climate-led is we basically have built a strategy focused specifically on deploying capital towards climate solutions that can decarbonize those specific sectors. And there's one other nuance to our strategy, which is that we're really focused on the time value of carbon. We all know we need to get to net zero by 2050. The thing is, to get to net zero by 2050, you really need to almost halve our emissions by 2030. That means we have a very small window in which we need to massively roll out climate solutions that can help decarbonize these big parts of our economy. And so what it means for us is that we focus on the solutions to the highest emitting, hardest to abate sectors like steel, but also look at solutions which are truly transformational. So to give you an example, steel is about 7% of global emissions. There are solutions out there that could decarbonize it by, say, 20%. Those are not the solutions we look at. What we would focus on, and indeed we've backed one player in Sweden, are solutions that could almost completely decarbonize the process. So for example, one of our portfolio companies, which if all goes well, is set to decarbonize steel production by 95%. So just to give you a sense of what we're seeking out to do, it's essentially building out the infrastructure base that is 100% consistent with a net zero end state, if you will. And around some of these sort of challenges and opportunities around backing these, the opportunity set that I've outlined basically is at a really interesting stage. Usually you have first-of-a-kind projects where you've de-risked the technology, you know it works. So for example, if you're building out, trying to decarbonize steel, coming back to my example, or looking to produce a way to provide long-duration energy storage, which is very, very necessary to support all of the rollout of renewables that we have right now, which is a great thing. But currently, there just isn't enough of it. And so that's also one solution that we're really focused on. If you're looking at things like that, there are a couple of characteristics. These things will tend to be too large for infrastructure. They will tend to be too asset-heavy for private equity, which looks for more sort of asset-light investments. But it will also be too early for infrastructure. And so a big part of the gap that we're looking to fill, again, and sort of it's very similar, in a similar place that we play, is bridging that gap and funding capital, and indeed institutional capital at scale, thanks to investors like BBVA, for example, to be able to bridge that gap and help those solutions commercialize quickly. What it means from a risk and opportunity perspective for us is, while we don't take much tech risk, that's the earlier part of the process. We take on a lot of commercialization risk. The upside from an opportunity standpoint is huge. If we believe that there will be a policy response and essentially consumer sentiment and regulatory drive continues to push towards decarbonization and penalize dirty industries, it means that you have a really significant total addressable market, and we're seeing that today. The other side of that is, just because you have a promising solution to decarbonize something doesn't mean that it will automatically translate into wide market adoption. And there's two parts to that. Part of it is to do with the company. Do you have the right management team? Do you have the right, essentially, skill sets to build it out in terms of the technology, the solution itself? And then on the other side, there's also the ecosystem factor. Because if you're looking to decarbonize large established industries, there needs to be regulatory support to help drive that. You also need shareholder alignment in terms of being able to actually push things through, have clear governance. So the opportunity is really, really significant, but when it comes to managing the risks, you probably need to have a pretty specialized skill set to understand those things and focus, but we're really confident that there are increasingly more and more people moving to the space and recognizing that gap, and the market is getting better and better at dealing with some of those risks and learning to structure around them.
Thanks, Evelina. No, that's very, very interesting and promising, no? And maybe continuing with the cycle, no? Because we've been seeing how Peter and Evelina are investing through their funds in different stages, no? In different stages of maturity. And I'll continue the cycle with Borja, who, as I was mentioning, leads our project finance team in energy, and is also the leader of our clean tech initiative. So Borja, how would you say, and Evelina was also making some references, what are the challenges and opportunities in financing some of these new technologies that are coming into the scene, and to what extent you see some of them becoming bankable in the short to mid-term?
Mm-hmm. At the end, I was looking at how you were framing the conversation, and I realized I come probably from the opposite side of the world. So when you come to this event, and probably the key words are innovation, emprendedores, etc., etc., etc. When you heard Pello saying at the very beginning that in the last 20 years, one big thing has changed is that with a very little platform, you can really reach a very big market, and that's something that was never true before. This is an industry, this is a challenge that probably has to be tackled in a different way. At the end of the day, and you, Antonio, said it very well, the goal is to decarbonize the economy. And that's a huge world, and that's a huge goal, and a huge challenge at the same time. The fact of the matter is that the carbon emissions are very, very distributed throughout the world. You said it before, real estate produces 40% of the CO2 emissions, and that's true. And we all, even on this beautiful building that we mentioned before, are here emitting CO2. So this is a challenge that has to be tackled with a scale. And a scale brings the need from capital at the end of the money. Maybe equity, maybe debt, and surely the combination of both two. But it needs capital. This is going to be an effort which is going to be spread out in many places and with a lot of capital. And it's going to take us 1, 2, 3, 4 decades to really beat it, and we are only seeing the beginning. How do we do it? How do we do it? I myself come from the infra world, and that basically means all the services, highways, airports, renewable energy type of economies which, as I said before, require a very large amount of capital. The way we are doing it here in BBVA is the following. We have realized that these technologies come with, number one, are new. Number two, to a certain extent or to a large extent, are untested. They are being discovered, developed, et cetera, in recent years, and definitely required a different type of approach than the traditional banking. And we have created this sort of clean tech group, what definitely intends to tackle these specific challenges. We definitely cannot analyze these industries and these technologies in the same way that we do with the ones that are with us already. This has to be done new and has to be done by new people. And that's how we are doing it. That is not the only tool that BBVA is choosing to use. We have our hosts here, BBVA Spark, and they cover a different type of ecosystem. And we even have our investment funds, where we try to also support the equity effort on these challenges. The way we look at this is, at the end of the day, we have been here before. So if you rewind back 30 years and you started to see those windmills popping up in our fields, and look at them saying, this is really going to save us, the fact of the matter, those things are saving us. So this sort of second evolution of that very same trend is here with us. It's less monolithic. It's not only wind farms or not only panels. Now we are facing electrical mobility, we're facing hydrogen, and many more technologies that you know about and that haven't reached my table yet, but I'm sure they will reach very, very soon. We've done it before, so we're going to do it again. We're hopeful.
Thanks very much, Borja. So I think it's quite clear that on the investor community and also on the financial industry and BBVA, of course, there's a huge opportunity, also challenge in this decarbonization journey that is going to last long. And maybe to put it a little bit more into details and ground a little bit into some of the examples of types of projects and innovation that we need, what I wanted to ask the panel now, and maybe starting with you, Peter, is could you name some of the technologies that are, in your view, more promising and that you are seeing in FIFWOL as technologies that will have great potential, let's say, in at least the midterm, no?
Yep, absolutely. So to start with, we have to start with the problem. So I think a couple of things have been mentioned here. So lack of capital and the wrong allocation of capital. We mentioned bankability. One more problem that hasn't been mentioned that will lead to the opportunities is the lack of commercial offtake. And I think where else to look for commercial offtake than to the largest climate offenders in the world, which are the real estate LPs and the industrial LPs that are short carbon. They are short capex. They will need to spend money that they don't like to spend, but now it's coming to fruition. You will have to spend to decarbonize. And in our view, this creates a problem, but it also is an opportunity. And just to go specifically to a few technologies, one that has been long overlooked is construction. Right? I think the last biggest invention, especially in residential construction, has been a nail gun over the last 50 years. There is so much that needs to happen on the material science, cement, aluminum, steel. Right? I think if cement were a country, it would be the third largest emitter in the world. But it's not just the material science. We see a lot of construction processes. We invested into 3D printing companies for houses. You are even seeing some wood frames that are able to do. We see high performance panels. Now we're actually going all the way into modular skyscrapers that are using Boeing-type models. And lastly, the automation. I think all of us, especially in the Western world and also in China, we are running out of productive labor force. So bringing automation and robots in this is not just a climate necessity, it's a human necessity because we simply don't have enough labor force. So one area where we deeply focus on is construction, and we have a lot of construction companies that are part of our consortium. So that's one area that I see very promising in the 5 years. The other one that you may not think as a venture investment, but I tend to disagree, is solar. And the reason why is, there's this conventional wisdom that, well, the solar technology is now mature, and there's not much to do, we can reduce some soft cost. Well, I tend to disagree with it. We see phenomenal opportunities in solar, and it goes across the value chain. So number one, we see new hyper-efficient panels coming out, tandem cells, perovskites, that are going to be, and I'm not kidding, 27, 30% efficient, whereas today they are 20. They will have to cost of the solar panel production and operation. So after a decade of empty promises, we now see them coming to the market. You look at recycling technology, look at, again, automation technologies, how to build these panels instead of 4 dudes putting these panels together. You have a robot that is self-driven, that install gigawatts of power at half the time and half the cost. So this is happening a lot. So I think we need to look in solar. That is for the foreseeable future by far the largest energy sector driving decarbonization. We need to look at the further innovation that's happening. And I think the third one that I think I can mention is probably around energy storage and batteries. There's been phenomenal progress made in batteries for transportation. The prices are down 90%. You can see the proliferation that's starting to happen around the world. I think California, which is the largest driving state, I think achieved 25% of new cars being electric sold. And by the way, in Bay Area, it's over 30% now. I think similar numbers are happening in China, in parts of Europe as well. But that technology is now being used in the grid storage and home storage. We see a pathway through new chemistries, enhanced LFP. There's now sodium batteries coming, high nickel manganese batteries for really high aviation applications. Now going into the stationary storage and deploying things really at half the cost. That's what's needed. So I see a lot of innovation coming from many parts of the world. Koreans are obviously big leaders in this. US is finally getting their act together. Obviously, China has been the leader. Where I'd like to challenge is also the European startup ecosystem here. Obviously, Northvolt has become the leader, but I think there are 5 more Northvolts needed in Europe to make this happen. So those are kind of the 3 sectors that we see kind of on the early and growth side happening.
Very interesting, Peter, and very, very diverse. No, I think that those also gives a very good sense on what we were mentioning at the beginning, how transversal this technological transformation is going to be. So in your case, Evelina, same question. Let's say, what are the most promising technologies that are going to have impact, you believe, in the short to mid-term?
So I might answer that in light of our focus, which is industrial decarbonization. So we tend to focus on buildings, industry mobility, and energy. And I'll answer it 2 ways, sort of promising from the perspective of one which can have really significant impact, and then also promising in terms of something that's likely to commercialize very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. So on the first, electrolyzers for green hydrogen probably have huge potential. So green hydrogen, first of all, it's almost impossible to read about decarbonization and sort of green infrastructure without someone mentioning green hydrogen. The reality is it's a really nascent space still. There's about 1 gigawatt of built capacity, but there's huge potential. I think there's an estimate for about 200 predicted by 2030. What that means is that there's going to be huge demand for these electrolyzers. And what's interesting about them is, given their industrial application, it's very likely that this is something that will become highly standardized and will need to be mass produced. And the reason that's interesting is that it means that there's a very clear cost down trajectory, and cost down means much more room for wide commercialization. So it's likely they'll take a cost down route similar to, for example, solar PV or batteries, conventional sort of battery technology. And the reason it's so interesting is that creates a really positive flywheel. If you have a product that's standardized, widely produced, and the more of that you have, the more costs come down, and essentially, so there's more and more scope for that to continue coming down the cost curve, be used, widely adopted for offtake, basically for it to be cost effective. And so from that perspective, it's potentially going to be really interesting in the next few years. There's obviously a lot of work done, but we, as part of our research, we talked to some of the sort of the OEMs in the space and some of the green hydrogen projects, and it feels like this is really something that is likely to have meaningful traction in the next few years. And then from a more of promising from this perspective of what do we already see a lot of evidence for, which could just accelerate, where there's a bit less risk and a bit less science figuring out involved, it would probably just be electrification of things that are conventionally powered by coal or oil or gas. A really great example of that is within transportation. Obviously, there's a lot more work to be done, and it's specifically with fleet electrification, heavy goods vehicle trucking, and everything else. But it's something that's already been proven. There's been wide adoption, and it doesn't have applications for all industrial uses and all uses, but it's something that we've already seen sort of the market accept, and so probably we'll see really meaningful rollout in the next few years.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. I think that the examples that you were pointing out and also the ones that Peter mentioned, I think also connect very good with the idea that Borja was mentioning, that many of these technologies are going to be very demanding on CapEx. No? You see at the hydrogen projects, for instance, that Evelina was mentioning, or the construction materials that Peter was referring to. Those are probably innovations that require, compared to others that have been leveraging more on digital, for instance, that require very, very large amount of financing rounds compared to other previous cycles. No? And I think that's precisely one of the challenges. And to that point again, Borja, what's in your view, which are those technologies that are coming into your pipeline that you think are going to be more easy to bank in the short term?
I'm going to choose to answer your question by not answering your question. And let me see if this goes fine. We in BBVA, we try to choose clients. And we hope that clients chooses us and repeat choosing us, et cetera, et cetera. And by doing so, we eventually choose technologies. So for us, the technology question is really an unknown. And it's hard for us to really have the skills to choose between one or the other. What we truly can do is to choose clients. You may have realized that Peter comes from San Francisco, Evelina comes from London. We were having a chat last week, Evelina and myself, and she was coming from Singapore only last week. So this is truly a very global industry in which the players are all over the place, looking for the best opportunities, the best technologies, et cetera, et cetera. And that work, that process, which at the end of the day, it is a process of trying to find the right technologies, then putting on top of the technology, the talent and the people. Putting on top of that, those skills that are able to wrap that technology into something that is able to attract capital, and it is also able to attract debt, that is something that cannot be overflown, that cannot be neglected. That is truly very, very valuable. And then by choosing clients like the ones that we have here before, we try to take this and get it. Being said that, at the end of the day, whenever you tackle a problem, you need to frame it somehow. And the way we have basically framed it is we have chosen 4 families, not necessarily technologies, but 4 families of initiatives that we initially intend to support. But this is a very fluid process. Number 1 would be the hydrogen and replacement fuels, all the SAFs, aviation fuels, et cetera, all the more efficient waste usage of our waste, and yes, also hydrogen when it comes. The second family would be mobility, which in the current decade that we are living on is to a large extent electrical mobility in all its shapes, is getting those cars ready, getting the amount of batteries ready, getting the underlying materials that are required ready, etc. And also putting the network of chargers out there. Then we have what we call storage and electrical networks. Is a large portion of this process is going to be to electrify our existence and replace that heating and replace that car, etc. That's a lot of what we are going to be doing for the next 2 decades. And that's going to be putting a lot of stress in our electrical networks. And that's going to be based on renewable energy that we have been sort of investing for the last 30 years. So over there, at this current moment, we are looking for storage solutions, so utility-scale storage solutions in our networks that allow us to do that better and more efficiently. But again, it's not only storage. It's the whole, how do we electrify and get those things ready? And the last one is probably of a different kind. A lot of what we have been speaking so far is about emitting less or emitting zero. And that is great, and forward-looking is definitely what we need to do. But we also need to start thinking about how do we detract the last 100 years of carbon emissions. And that is where carbon capture and storage, efficient storage, comes from. And as I said before, we have chosen those families, not necessarily technologies, but families. And we hope for the people who really know best to bring us the technologies.
Fantastic. No, that's very clear, Borja. Thank you very much. I think that we're reaching the final part of the panel. Maybe just one last question to shoot to Peter. Because you mentioned, Borja, how important talent is going to be in this journey. And I think in the conversation we had with Peter before, he was referring to the fact that many of these new technologies that need to come in place are going to be coming from academia, from universities, no? Because they will rely a lot on chemistry, on physics. And in that sense, Peter, what's your view on how the universities and the corporates, no, and the projects need to come together in order to accelerate this very purposeful technological transformation that we are talking about?
Yeah, so just really quickly, so the challenge that we're facing is pretty daunting. I think the estimates to decarbonize globally vary anywhere between $50 and $100 trillion. So that requires help of entire ecosystem. Where I'd see parts of the ecosystem failing, especially in the European Union, is on the university spin-outs and transferring it into startups. I just read recently a statistic that out of the 15 fastest European university spin-outs that are growing the fastest, 11 are from the UK, 4 are from Switzerland, and 0 are from the European Union. I think that's, in a way, indictment of the European startup system in connection to the university. I think the way to switch the patent system and the way things are getting spun out of universities and the interconnectedness that you see with the UK university, that you see with the Swiss universities, or with San Francisco, with Stanford and Berkeley and MIT near Boston. I think those are the areas that really need to change to further spur the innovation in the European Union.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Peter. So I think with this we come to an end. Let me just convey some key messages to wrap up. We are facing a huge technological transformation that is a very purposeful one, as we were saying, and that will last some decades. And in that sense, the investor community, the entrepreneurship community, and the financial institutions have a great challenge and an opportunity ahead of us that I think we'll have to look at it with a very positive narrative, no, on the impact that we can have, I think, as Evelina was saying, on the decarbonization of the economy and the lowering of the greenhouse gases emissions. So I think with that message, we can leave it here, and thank you very much to all the three of you for your time today and for participating in this panel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.